best of the rest of economic and labor news. You need to know this. We've known for some time that the investor-state dispute settlement process is a threat to our national sovereignty, but now we know that those international trade courts are also a huge benefit to billionaires and massive corporations. According to a new study published by York University in Toronto, quote, the beneficiaries of the ISDS have overwhelmingly been companies with more than $1 billion a year in annual revenue, especially extra-large companies with more than $10 billion in revenue and individuals with more than $100 million in net worth, end quote. In other words, massive trade agreements like the TPP and the TTIP aren't about expanding trade or opening markets. They're about making rich people and corporations even richer. And that's exactly why we must keep pushing Congress to say no to the Trans-Pacific Partnership. That study addresses how these ISDS courts have been given the appearance of legitimacy by allowing people to believe that these systems would also benefit individual and small businesses. But that's not how they work in practice. The authors explained that challenges are not brought to these courts through normal public processes that could be utilized by the little guy. Instead, cases are only heard by these private panels of arbitrators who often represent the same massive corporations likely involved in the case in question. Is it any wonder that nearly all of the money, as in 95% of it, that was awarded through ISDS challenges went straight to the super wealthy and giant corporations? As a trade campaigner for Greenpeace explained, quote, this trade deal is not about trade. It's about the transfer of power from people to big business, end of quote. As if they needed another way to cheat us or rig the system. The reasons to reject the TPP keep adding up, and it's time to let Congress know that they will vote down this trade deal or we will vote them out of office. Leave it to Utah to find a new way to demonize the poor. According to a recent article over at alternate.org, that state's Republican-controlled state Senate has approved new legislation that would force people into a 2-hour self-reliance class in order to receive public assistance. But in addition to being insulting to our fellow Americans who need a little help, the new requirement also fails basic logic. Bryce Covert over at Think Progress blog explained that poor people typically don't need help managing their money. He said, generally speaking, the poorest Americans spend larger portions of their budget on necessities and spend less on eating out, entertainment, and alcohol than others with more stable income. In other words, they don't need help budgeting. They simply need jobs and opportunities that create bigger budgets. Thankfully, Utah's new law would require a federal waiver to be implemented, so for now, it only serves to remind voters who needs to be replaced in their next elections. That would be the Republicans. When Donald Trump says he wants to make America great again, perhaps he leaves out the fact that he might do so with cheap foreign labor. But if his hiring practices at his high-end Mar-a-Lago club in Florida are any indication, that's what we should expect from the bombastic billionaire. According to a recent article in New York Magazine, since 2010, nearly 300 United States residents have applied for jobs at Trump's Mar-a-Lago club in Palm Beach, but only 17 were hired. The other 283 were low-wage foreign workers. Of course, Trump claims that the only reason Americans aren't hired is because they're not qualified, but job placement firms in the area say they have hundreds of qualified applicants. It's safe to assume that the same billionaire who said wages are too high in a presidential primary debate simply didn't want to pay American workers. This is yet another example of how Trump says one thing and does another, and Republicans should think long and hard about who it is they nominate to represent their party. For decades, corporations have worked tirelessly to whittle away our rights to join together and file class action lawsuits. And one of the most staunch opponents to our class action rights was the late Justice Antonin Scalia. That's why Alan Pike over at the Think Progress blog wrote, with Scalia's death, corporate America may have a harder time watering down collective legal rights. It's easy to see why taking on a huge corporation as one individual can be cost prohibitive and nearly impossible. But standing together as a class has made it possible for workers and consumers to challenge safety violation, pay discrepancies, and numerous other injustices. However, Justice Scalia and his corporate cohorts on our nation's court have worked to make it harder and harder to qualify as a class and stand up to corporate power as a collective unit. With Scalia out and the potential for a new justice under President Obama, we could finally undo that damage and start taking on corporate power once again. And finally, Naomi Klein has a few great ideas for Canada's next economy, and if we're smart, we should copy them here at home in the U.S. During a recent speech in Ottawa, Naomi announced the launch of a new program called Delivering Community Power. That plan lays out a vision of installing solar panels on the roofs of every post office, putting electric charging stations outside, and using a low-emissions fleet to service the public. Just as some in the United States have proposed using our post offices as banks for the poor, Klein wants Canada's mail offices to include food delivery, community space, and affordable banking. And she wants to incorporate the green energy component to lower costs, help save the planet, and give something back to the local communities. These public buildings are a great way to provide services that are much needed in the community and a wonderful way to stimulate local economies. Ms. Klein said, "We believe that this is no time to further contract public services, but neither is it a moment to simply protect the status quo. Rather, our moment calls on us to reimagine what is possible." End of quote. Let's show we share her belief and fight for change like community power here at home. And that's the way it is for the week of March 7th, 2016. I'm Thom Hartmann on the Economic and Labor News.